The screaming had stopped 3 days ago. That was what frightened Sorrel most. Not the sound itself, though the howls that tore from the eastern dungeon had haunted every corridor of Kael Morthen for as long as she could remember, but the silence that replaced them. A silence so absolute it pressed against the castle walls like something living, something waiting. She should not have been in this part of the fortress. The eastern wing had been sealed by royal decree before she had ever set foot in Kael Morthen, its iron doors bolted with chains thicker than a man's arm, its corridors patrolled by guards who answered to no one but the Alpha King himself. Servants whispered about what lay beyond those doors. A beast, a monster, a wolf so consumed by rage that it had shattered every cage, every restraint, every attempt at containment until the king had ordered chains forged from moonstone and silver, the only metals strong enough to hold an alpha-blooded wolf against its will. No one was permitted to enter. No one had survived trying. Sorrel pressed her back against the cold stone and listened to the silence. She had come here for a simple errand, dried ashroot from the old apothecary stores adjacent to the sealed wing. Fetch the herbs. Return before anyone noticed how long she had been gone, but the door to the storage chamber had been left ajar, and beyond it, another door stood open, one that should never have been open. And through that impossible gap, Sorrel had heard something that stopped her dead. Breathing. Not the ragged, feral panting the guards described when they traded stories over ale. This was slow, labored, the sound of something alive but barely. Something dying by inches in the dark. Every rational thought told her to turn back. She was nobody. A healer's apprentice with no family name, no pack affiliation, no standing in the rigid hierarchy of Kael Morthen. She had survived 4 years in this castle by being invisible, by keeping her head down, her mouth shut, and her hands busy with work that no one else wanted to do. Walking toward that sound would undo everything. Sorrel walked toward it anyway. The corridor beyond the open door was narrow and descending, carved from raw stone that wept with moisture. The air grew colder with each step, carrying a scent that made her stomach clench. Old blood, rusted iron, and something else beneath it all. Something wild and ancient that stirred a response deep in her chest she did not understand. Torches lined the walls at long intervals, most of them dead. The few that still burned cast pools of orange light that made the shadows between them feel solid. She descended for what felt like an eternity before the passage opened into a vast underground chamber. And there, chained to the far wall by links of gleaming moonstone, was the wolf. Sorrel's breath left her body. It was enormous, even collapsed on the stone floor, its body stretched longer than a warhorse. Its fur, matted and dull with neglect, might once have been the deep burnished gold of autumn oak leaves. Scars crisscrossed its flanks, some old and silvered, others raw and recent, as if the creature had been tearing at its own flesh. The chains ran from iron bolts sunk deep into the bedrock, wrapping around its neck, its forelegs, its hindquarters, binding it in a web of gleaming metal that left barely enough slack to breathe. Its eyes were closed. Sorrel stood frozen at the edge of the torchlight. This was the beast of Kael Morthen, the monster that had killed 3 handlers, 2 soldiers, and a healer who had tried to treat its wounds. The creature that the Alpha King kept chained beneath his own castle like a weapon too dangerous to wield, but too valuable to destroy. She should run. Instead, she took a step closer. The wolf's eyes opened. They were amber. Not the flat, feral amber of a wild animal, but deep and layered, shot through with veins of gold that caught the torchlight like molten metal. And in those eyes, beneath the pain and the exhaustion and the years of isolation, Sorrel saw something that shattered every warning she had ever been given. Recognition. The wolf was looking at her as if it had been waiting for her its entire life. The chains rattled as the massive body shifted. A low sound rumbled from its chest, not a growl, not a warning, but something closer to a word. A plea. Sorrel's hand rose without her permission, reaching toward the creature that had killed everyone who came near it. "Who are you?" she whispered. The wolf pressed its muzzle into her open palm. And the mark she had carried since birth. The silver crescent hidden beneath the bandage on her left wrist, the mark her grandmother had told her to never, ever reveal, erupted with light. The light lasted only a moment, but it changed everything. Sorrel snatched her hand back, clutching her wrist against her chest as the crescent throbbed with a warmth she had never felt before. The bandage had loosened, and she could see the mark glowing faintly beneath the linen, pulsing in rhythm with something she could not name. The wolf had not moved. Its amber eyes tracked her with an intensity that should have been terrifying. Instead, Sorrel felt the strangest sensation, as if a thread had been stitched between her ribs and the creature before her, pulled taut and humming with tension. She had grown up with stories of the mate bond. Every wolf-born child had. The invisible thread connecting two souls across any distance, any obstacle, any circumstance. But mate bonds were for wolves, for those with pack blood and shifting ability. Not for a common-born healer's apprentice who had never shifted a day in her life, and certainly not for whatever this creature was. She looked at the chains with the healer's eye she had spent 4 years training. Moonstone links, each etched with suppression sigils, marks designed to dampen a wolf's power, to sever the connection between human mind and animal instinct. But these were layered far beyond anything standard. Dozens of sigils, some carved so deep into the metal they had filled with dried blood. Whoever had designed these chains had not merely wanted to restrain, they had wanted to erase. She knelt close enough to see raw wounds beneath the moonstone cuffs where silver had burned through fur and into flesh. Close enough to smell the infection festering in untreated gashes. Close enough to count the ribs pressing through the wolf's dull coat. This animal was starving, wounded, dying, and no one cared. The wolf's great head lowered to the ground, its eyes never leaving her face. It exhaled slowly, and Sorrel watched its body shudder with the effort of that single breath. Her healer's instincts overrode her fear. She had set broken bones and howling children. She had cleaned wounds that would have made seasoned warriors retch. She had held a woman's hand through 18 hours of labor and never once looked away. She would not look away now. Sorrel unwound the bandage from her wrist and pressed her bare palm, crescent mark and all, against the wolf's neck. Heat flooded through her. Not the searing burn she expected, but something deeper. A warmth that started where skin met fur and radiated inward, filling her chest, her limbs, the hollow spaces behind her ribs she had not known were empty. The mark blazed silver white, and the wolf made a sound she had never heard any animal produce. A sound like grief breaking open. The images hit without warning. A boy. Dark-haired, amber-eyed, perhaps 17. Standing in the throne room of Kael Morthen, brighter than, warmer, filled with wolves who gazed at the boy with open adoration. He wore the circlet of the crown prince, laughing at something someone had said, and his laughter filled the hall like sunlight. The image shifted. The same boy, older now, 18, perhaps 19. Kneeling before the previous Alpha King, whose kind, worried face Sorrel did not recognize. The old king was placing something around the young man's neck, a pendant, silver, crescent-shaped, identical to the mark on Sorrel's wrist. Another shift. Darkness. Chains. The boy screaming as moonstone burned his flesh, his body convulsing between human and wolf as sigils carved themselves into metal. And standing over him, watching his agony with flat, passionless eyes, the current Alpha King. Riven. The images shattered. Sorrel pulled her hand away, trembling violently. The wolf watched her, and she understood. This was not a beast. This was Riven's brother. The crown prince who had vanished over a decade ago, declared dead, mourned by the kingdom and forgotten by all. He had been here the entire time, chained beneath his own castle, imprisoned by the man who had stolen his throne. "O gods," Sorrel breathed, "you are Calum." The wolf closed its eyes, and Sorrel understood, with a certainty that terrified her, that the mark her grandmother had bound and hidden meant she was bonded to a prince the world believed was dead. A prince whose brother would kill them both if he ever discovered the truth. Sorrel did not sleep that night. She lay in her narrow cot, staring at the crescent. It had stopped glowing, but the warmth remained. A low hum beneath her skin pulsing in rhythm with a heartbeat not her own. His. Her grandmother had known. Had seen the mark on the infant's wrist and spent the next 16 years teaching Sorrel to hide it. "There are those who would kill you for what you carry," the old woman had said on the night Sorrel left home. "The mark chooses its bearer. It cannot be undone, cannot be transferred, but it can be silenced, and silence is your only protection." Sorrel had assumed it was a healer's brand, some ancestral gift passed through bloodlines too faint to trace. She had never imagined it was a mate bond waiting for its other half. She waited until the deep hours, then slipped from her cot with a satchel of supplies, salve for infection, clean bandages, dried meat, a skin of water, and crept toward the eastern wing. She knew the castle's hidden veins better than anyone. 4 years of fetching supplies, carrying messages, and running errands had given her an intimate knowledge of every servant's passage, every forgotten stairwell, every crack in Kael Morthen's ancient bones. She found the same route from that afternoon, the storage chamber with the door that should have been locked. Someone had been careless with the bolts, or perhaps something had guided her steps. The descent felt shorter this time. When she reached the vault, the wolf raised its head. Those eyes found her in the darkness, and the bond pulled tight, a physical sensation, like a hand pressing against her sternum. The wolf's tail moved, a single weak sweep across the stone floor. He was glad she had come back. "I brought supplies," she whispered, kneeling beside him. "The wounds on your forelimbs are infected. If I do not treat them, the rot will spread." The wolf lowered its great head and exposed the raw, weeping gashes beneath the moonstone cuffs. Sorrel worked in silence, cleaning wounds with solutions that must have burned terribly, though the wolf made no sound beyond a faint tremor in its breathing. She packed the deeper gashes with healing paste, wrapped what she could reach with clean linen, and pressed small pieces of dried meat between the wolf's jaws, watching his throat work to swallow food he had not been given in days. "They stopped feeding you," she said, not a question. When the silence began, they stopped coming entirely. The guards who were supposed to maintain the prisoner had abandoned their duties. They assumed the beast was dying. They were content to let it happen. Sorrel's hands shook, not with fear but with a fury so sharp it startled her. She had spent her life being quiet, being small, being invisible. But this calculated cruelty, this slow execution disguised as neglect, ignited something in her she did not recognize. "I will come back," she promised, pressing her palm flat against his neck one final time. The bond hummed between them, and she felt his exhaustion, his gratitude, and beneath it all, a fragile, desperate thing she was afraid to name. Hope. For 3 weeks, Sorrel kept her impossible routine. Every night, she descended. She treated wounds, brought food and herbal tonics brewed in secret. She talked to him about nothing and everything, and though the wolf could not answer in words, she learned to read his responses, the position of his ears, the cadence of his breathing, the way his eyes would soften when she spoke, as if her voice was the only thing keeping him tethered to sanity. The bond deepened with each visit. What had begun as a faint thread was becoming something stronger, a cord forged not from moonstone and cruelty, but from gentleness and persistence. She could feel his emotions bleeding through at odd moments during the day, a flash of pain when guards walked overhead, a surge of alertness when she was near, a constant ache of loneliness that echoed her own. She was falling for a wolf she had never seen in human form. On the 14th night, she found new wounds, not self-inflicted. Clean surgical cuts along his ribs, as if someone had been testing the depth of his flesh with a blade. The wolf's eyes flickered toward the passage, toward the throne room above. Someone else was visiting Calum, and they were not coming to heal. On the 18th night, the wolf shifted. Sorrel woke against his side to find the warmth at her back had changed. Harder, angular, unmistakably human. She turned, and her breath stopped. A man lay curled behind her. Dark hair fell across a face carved sharp by starvation, high cheekbones, a jaw like cut granite, lips cracked and pale. The moonstone chains dug into human wrists and ankles, suppression sigils glowing faintly against bare flesh. His eyes opened. Amber, shot with gold and utterly, devastatingly human. "You stayed," he rasped. His voice was rusted from years of disuse, a sound like gravel dragged across iron. Sorrel's eyes burned. "Of course I stayed." His hand found her wrist, and his thumb pressed against the crescent. The mark blazed white. "I dreamed you," Calum whispered. "Every night. A girl with steady hands and no fear. I thought I had invented you to survive." A tear slid down Sorrel's cheek. "I am real." "I know." His voice cracked. "That is what terrifies me." His fingers tightened. "You have to stop coming here. Riven knows. He has always known about the bond. That is why he chained me." A sound from above. Footsteps on the stairs. Multiple guards. "Run," he gasped. "Sorrel, run. If he finds you here." She looked at him, chained, helpless, his eyes holding a fear that was not for himself, but for her. "I will come back for you," she swore, but she was already moving. She heard the chamber door groan open behind her, heard Riven's cold, precise voice echo off the stone. "Good evening, brother. I see your wounds are healing rather well for a beast with no keeper. Shall we discuss how that is possible?" Sorrel ran until her lungs burned, until she reached her cot and collapsed, pressing her face into the pillow to muffle the sobs. In the darkness below, Calum's agony ripped through the bond like a blade. Riven knew. He had always known. And now he knew about her. She pressed her thumb against the crescent and made her choice. She would not run. Not without him. Dawn came with the taste of iron in Sorrel's mouth. She had bitten her cheek raw through waves of phantom pain, Calum's pain. Whatever Riven had done after discovering the healed wounds had lasted for hours, a systematic cruelty that ebbed and flowed with the precision of someone who knew exactly how much a body could endure. She forced herself through the motions of her day while her mind worked. Moonstone chains could not be broken by force. The metal drew its strength from the same lunar energy that powered a wolf's shift, turning the creature's own nature into its prison. She had found fragments in the old healing texts, references to women called breakers, born with the ability to unmake magical bindings. But the passages were sparse, cryptic, incomplete. She understood the concept, but nothing of the method. Her grandmother would know. Orna had always known more than she revealed. Mistress Sorrel? Haddon, the head healer's assistant, a wiry, sharp-eyed man who had shown her grudging respect over 4 years. "The king has summoned all healers to the Great Hall, immediately." The Great Hall was built to intimidate. Vaulted ceilings of dark stone, iron chandeliers holding 100 candles each, and a throne carved from obsidian that seemed to swallow light. Riven sat upon it like a man born to the position. Silver blonde hair swept back from a sculpted face. His eyes were the same amber as his brother's, but colder, flatter. The eyes of a man who had learned to perform emotion without ever truly feeling it. 23 healers assembled. Sorrel positioned herself near the back. "The creature housed below this castle has been exhibiting unusual behavior," Riven announced. "Wounds that should have festered are healing. Someone has been providing unauthorized treatment. Each of you will submit to a reading of your recent magical expenditure." Sorrel watched Riven's court mage, a gaunt woman named Thyra, begin scanning healers one by one, pressing her palm to each forehead. 8 minutes until the audit reached the back. 6, 4. Sorrel's eyes fell on the iron brazier burning near the wall. A container of dried fireweed sat on the ledge, harmless in small quantities. An entire container in an open flame would be something else entirely. She did not let herself think. She tipped the fireweed into the brazier. Thick, acrid smoke erupted across the hall. Healers coughed and stumbled. Guards shouted. Sorrel dropped to her knees and crawled, 7 paces to the servants' door behind the eastern tapestry. She pushed through and was running before anyone registered that one healer was missing. She went down. Into the dungeon, where Calum lay in human form, his body bearing fresh marks that made her vision blur with fury. His eyes opened at her approach. Sorrel. Her name in his ruined voice. You should not be here. The king is scanning for magical signatures, she gasped, kneeling beside him. I have minutes at best. Then go. If he catches you here, he will kill me regardless. The moment Thyra reads my signature from your wounds, I am dead, whether I am beside you or hiding in the outer provinces. Her hands were steady now, steadier than they had any right to be. There is no version of my life that does not lead back to this chamber, to you. His eyes searched her face. You barely know me. I know enough. She pressed her palm against his chest, over his heart. The bond flared between them, fierce and bright. I know that you are not the monster they made you. I know that years in chains have not destroyed what you are. And I know that this mark has been waiting for you since before I was born. Calum's expression cracked. The walls he had built, the defenses that had kept him sane through years of isolation, fractured beneath the weight of her certainty. I cannot protect you, he whispered. I am chained to a wall. I can barely hold human form. What good am I to you? You are everything, and I am going to get you out of here. She gripped his hands. I need to reach my grandmother in Ostenmere. She hid the truth about this mark my entire life. The old texts gave me the name, Breaker. She can give me the knowledge of how to wield it. 3 days there, 3 days back. His voice dropped. I do not know if I can last. Sorrel pressed her lips to his forehead. The contact sent sparks cascading through the bond. You have survived this long in darkness. You can survive 6 days knowing someone is fighting her way back. Calum closed his eyes. When he opened them, the terror was still there, but something else had risen alongside it. A stubborn, desperate flame. 6 days, he said. I will hold. Sorrel rose, gathered her satchel, and turned toward the dark passage. Every step away from him felt like tearing stitches from a wound. The bond stretched between them, taut and aching, a thread that would not break, but would not stop hurting either. She had made it barely 20 paces when the sound of boots echoed above. Sorrel had made it barely 20 paces from Calum when footsteps thundered in the passage above. No time to flee. Only enough to squeeze through a narrow fissure in the chamber wall and press herself flat in the pocket of dead air behind it. Through the crack, she watched 3 soldiers enter, followed by Thyra with hands already glowing, and behind them, moving with the unhurried grace of a predator, Riven. Read the chamber, Riven ordered. Thyra knelt, pressing palms to the stone floor. Blue light spread outward in concentric rings, creeping toward the fissure where Sorrel hid. It stopped 3 inches from the crack. Recent healing magic, Thyra confirmed. But there is something else. The signature carries bonded resonance. The healer is connected to the prisoner through a mate bond. The silence that followed was the most dangerous sound Sorrel had ever heard. Riven crouched before his brother. You have found a mate. How inconvenient. The moonstone should have severed your ability to bond entirely, but you always were stronger than expected. He stood, brushing dust from his coat with casual precision. Find the healer. Examine every woman in this castle for a crescent mark, silver, on the left wrist. It was our mother's bloodline signature. She passed certain abilities to Calum before she died. If his mate carries the corresponding mark, she is not merely a healer. She is the only person alive who can unmake his chains. Through the bond, Sorrel felt Calem's terror, a cold, drowning wave that threatened to pull her under. Riven had always known. Had known that somewhere in the world a breaker existed who could undo what he had done, and he had spent years ensuring that Breaker never found her way to this chamber. But she had found it anyway. "Bring her to me alive," Riven added as he turned to leave. "I have questions that require answering before she dies." After the torchlight receded and the last echo of their footsteps faded, Sorrel squeezed back through the fissure on trembling legs. Calem was shaking, his entire body convulsing with tremors that rattled his chains against the stone. "He will find you," Calem gasped. "Every woman in the castle. He will check every one." "Then I need to be gone before he finishes." She knelt before him and took his face in her hands, feeling the sharp bones beneath his skin, the stubble roughening his jaw, the dampness of tears he would never admit to shedding. "I am not leaving you. I am leaving the castle. There is a difference." She kissed his forehead one final time, felt the bond spark between them like a promise sealed in light, and climbed the passage to the world above. The servants' gate was still unguarded. Riven's soldiers were searching inward, not yet imagining their quarry would flee outward. Sorrel stepped through the gate into the fading twilight, pulled her cloak tight against the evening chill, and began to walk. Behind her, the mark burned like a small, steady star, and deep beneath the castle she felt a pulse through the bond. Faint, aching, but steady. Calem, holding on. 3 days to Ostenmere. 3 long, brutal days of sleeping in ditches and drinking from streams, following the mark like a compass needle pointing toward her grandmother and the knowledge that could save his life. The village of Ostenmere clung to the edge of a forest so old the trees had names. Sorrel arrived on the 3rd evening, boots worn through, body aching from days of walking through farmers' fields and woodland paths. The mark had been her compass, pulsing with warmth when Calem was holding, stuttering when he faltered. It had not stuttered yet. Her grandmother's cottage sat at the village's edge, half consumed by forest. Orna Greythistle was small, bent, her white hair pulled back in a braid like spider silk. But her eyes, dark and sharp as obsidian, had lost none of their ferocity. Those eyes fixed on the exposed crescent, and Orna's face collapsed. "You found him," the old woman breathed. "You knew what this mark was, what I was, and you said nothing." "I said nothing to keep you alive, while my mate rotted in chains." Sorrel stepped inside. The old texts mentioned breakers by name, but nothing more. Fragments. Riddles. "I need to know how the power actually works." Orna sat her down. "Breakers unmake what should never have been forged. We dissolve magical bindings, chains, sigils, blood oaths, compulsion spells. The texts you found were deliberately incomplete. The full knowledge was never written down. It passes from breaker to breaker, through blood and memory." Orna held up her own left wrist. In the firelight, Sorrel could see a mark identical to hers, faded, almost invisible, bleached by decades. "I was a breaker once. The power diminishes with age and disuse. By the time I understood what you carried, I no longer had the strength to act." Sorrel described Calem's chains, primary sigils, secondary dampening marks, tertiary seals preventing full transformation. Orna's face grew darker with each layer. 3 tears. That is annihilation. And he still shifted? After all those years? He shifted for me. Then the bond sustained what the sigils tried to destroy. Orna withdrew a leather-bound manuscript from a heavy trunk. "But breaking those chains without understanding the sequence will kill him. They have been part of him for over a decade. His body has integrated them. Remove them carelessly, and you tear away the parts of himself that have grown around them. So the chains are killing him slowly, but removing them could kill him instantly. Unless you break them from the inside, you reach through the bond, anchor his wolf, and dissolve the bindings layer by layer. The wolf survives because you are holding it in place. The chains fall because you are unmaking them. Both must happen simultaneously. That sounds impossible. It sounds like something only a true mate could accomplish. The crescent was never just a bond marker. It was a key, designed to unmake what Moonstone creates. Orna extended both hands. I will teach you the only way that works. Not with study, with memory. Will it hurt? Enormously. The transfer was exactly as agonizing as promised. Centuries of breaker lore compressed into a torrent that threatened to shatter her consciousness. She screamed, she wept, she held on. When it was over, Sorrel slumped across the table. Orna looked diminished, hollowed out, as if something essential had been removed. Rest, child. Tomorrow you ride back. And when you reach those chains, you will break them. Or you will die trying. She slept on her grandmother's narrow bed. When she woke, Orna was dead. The old woman sat in her chair by the hearth, hands folded, expression peaceful. The faded crescent on her own wrist had vanished entirely, every last trace of power transferred in the night. Sorrel knelt and pressed her face against Orna's cold hands. I will not waste what you gave me, she whispered. She buried her grandmother in the garden beneath the wild herbs that had been the old woman's life's work. Then she took the manuscript and began the journey back. The mark had changed. Where before it pulsed with warmth, it now burned with purpose. The breaker's knowledge sat in her bones like a second skeleton, ancient and terrible and ready. She was no longer a healer's apprentice. She was the key to a prince's cage, and she was coming to turn. Sorrel smelled the smoke before she saw the fortress. It rose from Kael Morthen in thin black ribbons, not hearth smoke, but something acrid, chemical. 6 days gone, and something had gone terribly wrong. The mark was screaming. Not its steady pulse, but a frantic, stuttering burn. The signature of a wolf in extremis. Fighting, suffering, losing. She pressed her thumb against the crescent and forced herself to keep walking instead of running blindly toward the agony. 6 days of travel had tested her endurance, but nothing tested her like the bond's screaming. Every instinct demanded she sprint to Caelim's side. Every ounce of the tactical thinking she had learned in 4 years of castle survival told her that doing so would get them both killed. The main gates were barred, soldiers pacing the battlements in numbers she had never seen, hardened warriors in the black and crimson of Riven's personal regiment. This was not the castle she had left. This was a fortress preparing for siege. Sorrel circled to the northern wall, lowered herself into the old drainage channel she had discovered in her 2nd year, and crawled through filth until she emerged in the lower cellars, gasping and retching. From above, chaos. Wild howling, the clash of steel. 2 guards talking in the corridor beyond. Third wolf to go feral today. The king doubled the Moonstone channels. The backlash is tearing through every bonded wolf in the castle. Why not simply kill the beast? Because the king needs it alive. He says the breaker will return for it. When she does, he wants the beast conscious enough to watch her die. Riven was using Caelim as bait. He had amplified the suppression, knowing the agony would pull Sorrel through the bond, which was exactly what she had done. She forced herself to think. Riven expected her to rush to the dungeon blinded by urgency. So she would not go to the dungeon. Not yet. She needed allies. 4 years of invisibility had taught her who could be trusted. The cooks, stable hands, servants who saw everything and were seen by nothing. She found Haddon in the lower apothecary, grinding herbs with the methodical rhythm of a man using work to keep his hands from shaking. When Sorrel stepped from the shadows, his pestle froze mid-stroke. He stared at her for 3 heartbeats. Then he crossed the room and bolted the door. You are either the bravest woman in Kael Morthen, or the most foolish, he said quietly. Riven has posted a death warrant. Your description is on every gate, every guardhouse within 50 miles. He has tripled the guard on the eastern dungeon, and Thyra has warded every entrance with detection sigils. I know. But the wolves are suffering, Haddon. The increased suppression is destabilizing every pack bond. 3 feral today, 2 soldiers and a kitchen boy. How many tomorrow? How many before the entire pack shatters? Haddon's face went pale. He would tear apart his own kingdom to catch one woman? He would tear apart anything to keep his throne. Calum is the rightful alpha. As long as he lives, Riven's claim is illegitimate. And as long as I live, there is someone who can free him. Sorrel pulled out the manuscript and opened it to the original architecture. There is a second entrance to the dungeon, a ritual passage connecting to the old chapel granary, sealed 2 centuries ago, but sealed is not destroyed. Haddon studied the diagram. The chapel granary, 4 guards. Thyra passes every hour. Which is why I need a distraction. The feral wolves in the infirmary. If their sedation tonics were accidentally substituted with a stimulant. Silence. She watched the calculation play across his face, the weighing of risk against conscience, of safety against the howls echoing through the corridors above them. Haddon picked up his pestle and resumed grinding. Give me 1 hour. Thank you. The ghost of a smile crossed his weathered face. Do not thank me yet. Thank me when the rightful king sits on the throne and I can sleep through the night without hearing wolves scream. Sorrel slipped back into the shadows and began counting minutes. 1 hour. Then the distraction. Then the dungeon. Then everything. The hour crawled past on bleeding knees. Sorrel positioned herself in the abandoned corridor connecting the servants' wing to the chapel granary, her body pressed into an alcove behind grain barrels that had not been moved in years. The mark burned with such intensity she had to clench her jaw to keep from crying out. Whatever Riven was doing to Calum had intensified, waves of agony that made her vision swim and her hands tremble. Hold on, she thought. I am here. I am close. The explosion of sound came without warning. Howls erupted from the infirmary, 3 feral wolves unleashed. Every guard sprinted toward the chaos. Haddon had delivered. She found the sealed altar stone in the chapel granary and pressed her crescent against it. Silver light flared. The stone slid aside, revealing a passage descending into blackness. She emerged on a ledge high on the chamber wall, and the scene below nearly broke her. Calum flickered between forms, fur rippling into skin and back in agonizing waves as doubled sigils fought to contain a shift his instincts desperately demanded. New chains bound his muzzle, his tail, and standing over him, hands pressed to the moonstone channels, was Thyra, feeding power into the system, amplifying the suppression tenfold, crushing his wolf out of existence. Sorrel dropped from the ledge. Thyra spun, her eyes widened at the filthy, exhausted woman with the blazing crescent. The breaker's power erupted from Sorrel's hands, not gentle healing but something older, fiercer, a force that existed to unmake. It struck Thyra's spell like a hammer striking glass. The spell shattered. The mage staggered backward. Every detection sigil you placed is dissolved, Sorrel said, advancing. That is what a breaker does. Thyra's hands came up, blue light crackling. You cannot defeat me. I have served the crown for 20 years. You are an apprentice playing with power you do not understand. You are right about one thing. I do not fully understand this power. The crescent blazed brighter. But it understands me. Silver light exploded outward. Every ward, every amplification channel unraveled like thread pulled from a tapestry. Thyra screamed as decades of her work disintegrated, the backlash driving her to her knees. Sorrel knelt beside Calum and pressed both hands against the primary moonstone links. The metal seared her palms. She ignored it. Calum, come back to me. I cannot do this alone. His wild eyes focused barely on her face. There you are, she whispered. Stay with me. She closed her eyes and reached through the bond. The breaker's power plunged into the moonstone, into the web of suppression woven so tightly around his wolf that the two had become nearly inseparable. Orna had warned her. The chains were part of him now. She could not shatter them. She had to untangle them. The tertiary seals first, the outermost bindings preventing full transformation. She wrapped her awareness around his wolf, holding it steady like cradling a flame in cupped hands, and dissolved them one by one. The wolf screamed, not in pain, in release. Each seal that fell was a shackle dropping from a limb that had forgotten freedom. The secondary dampening marks were more complex, interlocking patterns that had suppressed his cognitive function, reducing him to an animal for years at a time. She dismantled them with precision, guided by centuries of inherited knowledge. Each mark dissolved revealed another beneath it, and another. Riven's paranoia made manifest in layer upon layer. One more layer. Hold on. The primary sigils, the deepest bindings, carved into the moonstone itself, anchored to the bedrock beneath the fortress. These were not merely chains. They were woven into his marrow, his heartbeat, his breath. Removing them without killing him would require holding every thread of his being in place while dismantling the cage around it. She could feel the cost already. Her palms were blistered where the moonstone burned. Blood ran from her nose. The breaker's power was consuming her as surely as the sigils had consumed him, the difference being that she had chosen this fire. "I need you to breathe with me," she whispered. "Match my breath. In. Out. Stay with me." She felt his breathing steady against hers, 2 heartbeats finding the same rhythm through the bond. Then she reached into the deepest layer and pulled. Sorrel broke them anyway. The vibration passed through every stone in the fortress. A tremor felt in the kitchens, the barracks, the watchtowers. The moonstone links cracked, crumbled, and fell from his body in pieces that shattered like broken glass. The sound of them striking the stone floor was the most beautiful thing Sorrel had ever heard. For the first time in over a decade, Calum was unchained. The shift completed. Not the tortured flickering, but a full, glorious transformation. Golden fur rippled into bronzed skin. He knelt on the stone floor, scarred and shaking, gasping as if he had been held underwater and had finally broken the surface. He looked at his hands, flexed fingers that moved without the drag of chains. Then he looked at Sorrel. "You came back," he said, and his voice was different, clearer, stronger. The voice of a man emerging from a nightmare into dawn. "I promised." He reached for her face, trembling, impossibly gentle. "I felt you. Every step. Every mile. I held on because I could feel you coming closer." Horns blared above. Full castle lockdown. Calum rose unsteadily. The movement was uncertain. Years of confinement had wasted muscles that had once been powerful. But there was a coiled energy in him that made the air crackle. "I am not leaving. Calum. Riven stole my life. He let me rot in the dark while he sat on a throne that was never his." His eyes blazed gold. "I will not flee from my own kingdom. You can barely stand. Then I will fight on my knees." He met her eyes. "And I have my mate beside me. That is enough." Sorrel took his hand. The bond flared silver gold between them, 2 halves of a circuit completed. Together then. Together. They emerged into the granary as soldiers burst through the courtyard doors. 12 warriors in black and crimson, swords drawn, kill on sight. Calum stepped in front of Sorrel. "Stay behind me," he growled, and his voice carried harmonics that vibrated in her chest, the resonance of an alpha issuing a command to his pack. Every wolf in the room felt it. The soldiers hesitated. Not mercy, but instinct. The weight of that voice, the authority that years of chains had failed to erase. One lunged. Calum caught the blade between his bare hands. The steel shattered. "I am Calum, firstborn son of Alpha King Aldrin, true heir to the throne of Kael Morthen. The brother you serve stole my crown and buried me alive." 5 soldiers dropped to their knees, wolves overriding training. 7 remained standing. Calum shifted. The transformation instantaneous, golden fur gleaming like burnished bronze, scars remaining as silver lines mapping his suffering. The wolf moved with devastating precision, each soldier disarmed, pinned, or thrown, not killed. Within minutes, all 12 lay subdued. They moved through the corridors, and wolves they passed, servants, soldiers, healers, stopped and stared. Pack instinct, older and deeper than memory, recognized the alpha that should have been. By the time they reached the great hall, 20 wolves followed in their wake. Haddon was among them. Riven waited inside. The Alpha King stood before his obsidian throne, flanked by 30 armed soldiers, and Thyra, who had dragged herself from the dungeon and now stood pale and shaking at her master's side. Riven's face was composed. No fear, no fury, just the cold calculation of a man who had prepared for this moment. "Brother," Riven said, "you look well for a dead man." Calum stepped into the candlelight. It caught his scars, and a murmur rippled through the assembled wolves, soldiers and servants alike, as they registered the evidence of years of systematic torture. "I challenge you," Calum said, "for the throne of Kael Morthen, for the pack you have corrupted, for every wolf you have harmed with your stolen crown." Riven smiled. It was the most terrifying expression Sorrel had ever seen. "I accept," the king said. "But I wonder, brother, in your eagerness to play the hero, did you consider what happens to your precious mate while we fight?" He snapped his fingers. Hands seized Sorrel from behind. She twisted, catching a glimpse of soldiers who had circled through the side corridors while attention was fixed on the brothers. A blade pressed against her throat. "The rules of challenge state that no interference is permitted." Riven continued smoothly. "Your mate will be held as insurance. If you win, she goes free. If you lose..." He shrugged. "Breakers are dangerous creatures. It would be irresponsible to let one roam free." Calum's eyes burned with golden fire. The wolf was surging beneath his skin, demanding blood, but the blade at Sorrel's throat held him frozen. "Do not," Sorrel said, and her voice was steady despite the steel kissing her neck. "Do not let him use me against you. Fight. Win. I can survive a blade. You cannot survive a severed throat. And you cannot survive another decade in chains. Neither can the wolves of this kingdom." She held his gaze through the bond, pouring every ounce of certainty she possessed into the connection. "Trust the bond, Calum. Fight." A moment of silence stretched between them, a conversation conducted entirely through the invisible thread that had connected them since before either was born. Then Calum turned to face his brother. "Begin," he said. Riven shifted first. Silver white, lean and lethal, built for speed rather than raw power. He launched himself at Calum with a snarl that shook dust from the rafters. Calum met him mid-leap. The collision of two alpha wolves sent a shockwave through the great hall. Candles guttered. Stone cracked beneath their combined weight. The assembled wolves pressed against the walls as the brothers tore into each other with a fury that transcended strategy and descended into something primal. Sorrel struggled against the soldiers holding her, her eyes fixed on the battle. The blade at her throat bit skin, drawing a thin line of blood, but she barely felt it. The bond was flooded with Calum's emotions, rage, determination, and beneath it all, a grief so vast it threatened to swallow everything else. He was not just fighting his brother, he was fighting years of betrayal. Riven was faster, darting and weaving, scoring cuts along Calum's flanks with surgical precision. He fought like the king he pretended to be, calculated, efficient, exploiting every weakness in his brother's starved and scarred body. But Calum fought like a wolf forged in darkness with nothing to do but survive. Every blow absorbed and answered with interest, every feint read, every dodge countered. Relentless, grinding pressure that gave no ground and asked no quarter. Blood spattered the ancient stones. Both wolves bled from dozens of wounds. But Sorrel could see the difference that the crowd was beginning to notice too. Riven was tiring. His muscles were those of a wolf who hunted for sport, not survival. His endurance was that of a king who had never been truly tested. Calum had been tested every single day. The golden wolf caught Riven's shoulder in his jaws and bore him to the ground. The silver wolf thrashed, claws raking Calem's chest, teeth snapping at his throat. But Calem held, jaw locked, weight pinning his brother to the stone. For a moment, Sorrel dared to hope. Then Thera stepped forward. The court mage's hands blazed blue. Not a combat spell, but a suppression surge targeted directly at Calem's wolf. The same technique she had been using in the dungeon, now weaponized in the open hall. It hit Calem like a physical blow. His wolf form flickered, the familiar, agonizing stutter between human and animal. His grip on Riven loosened. The silver wolf scrambled free, and Calem collapsed, convulsing as the magic tried to force him back into the cage Sorrel had just destroyed. "Did you truly believe it would be that simple?" Riven snarled, circling his fallen brother. "That you could walk out of your cage and take what is mine? I will not lose my kingdom to a broken wolf and his common-blooded mate." He lunged for Calem's throat. The crescent detonated. Silver light erupted from Sorrel, raw, unfiltered, responding not to intention, but to the bone-deep imperative that her mate was dying, and nothing else mattered. The soldiers holding her were thrown backward. The blade clattered away. Thyra's spell collapsed like a tower struck by lightning. Sorrel crossed the hall in a blaze of silver light, feet barely touching the ground, the power of every breaker who had come before her surging through her veins. She dropped to her knees beside Calem and pressed her hands to his chest. "Come back," she commanded, and her voice carried a harmonic resonance that was not alpha, but something older, deeper. The voice of a breaker speaking to the wolf she was bonded to. "I did not break your chains to watch you die on this floor. I did not lose my grandmother, crawl through filth, and defy a king to let suppression magic take you again." She pushed power through the bond, not to unmake, but to restore. To burn away the remnants of Thyra's assault and anchor his wolf in its rightful place. His eyes opened, amber, clear, fully present. "There you are," she whispered. The same words she had spoken in the dungeon, the words that had become their covenant. Calem shifted in golden light, rising to meet his brother with force that cracked the flagstones. This time, Sorrel's power flowed through the bond, a continuous current reinforcing every cell, every instinct. She was not fighting beside him. She was fighting through him. The golden wolf and the silver collided for the final time, jaws locked, claws tore, bodies twisted in a savage dance the assembled wolves would remember for the rest of their lives. Then Calem found his brother's throat. He did not bite down. The golden wolf stood over the silver, jaws clamped around the vulnerable flesh, amber eyes burning with the light of an alpha forged in darkness and emerged unbroken. "Yield." The silver wolf's body went limp. A howl rose. Recognition, alignment, a pack feeling its rightful alpha for the first time and responding with an instinct that could not be faked or commanded. Calem shifted and addressed the hall. "My brother stole from me. He stole from all of you. He chained your rightful alpha beneath this castle and let you believe he was dead. He corrupted the bonds that hold this pack together." His eyes found Sorrel. "And he would have killed the woman who freed me, a woman whose only crime was hearing a dying wolf breathe and choosing to help." She walked into a dungeon that had killed every person who entered it. She touched a wolf that had not been touched with kindness in years. She broke chains that were supposed to be unbreakable. He extended his hand. Sorrel crossed the hall on legs that barely held her, the silver light fading to a warm glow. She took his hand, and the bond sang. Not urgency, but something that sounded like permanence. "This is Sorrel. She is my mate, my breaker. And if you will have me as your king, she will be your queen." The howl that answered shook Kael Morthen to its foundations. The weeks that followed were a storm that never truly settled. Riven was confined to the eastern dungeon, unchained, without cruelty, but unable to go free. Thyra, stripped of her powers, revealed the worst of it. Riven had not merely stolen the throne. He had built a kingdom-wide suppression network using Calem's imprisonment as its anchor, subtly dampening the independent will of every bonded wolf in the territory for over a decade. When Sorrel broke those chains, she had severed the central node. Wolves across the kingdom were waking from a fog they had never known existed. The fury was immense. Calum navigated it with a patience that startled those who expected rage, meeting with pack leaders, hearing grievances, dispensing justice with a fairness that had no trace of vengeance in it. He walked the corridors every night, learning the names of those his brother had treated as invisible, asking the cooks and servants and stable hands what they needed before he asked the nobles. He rules the way he heals, Haddon observed one morning, watching the new king settle a dispute between two pack elders with quiet questions rather than commands. Carefully, patiently, as if every person matters. Every person does, Sorrel replied. The chains did not create his compassion, they tested it. And he passed. Revenge is a chain of its own, Calum told her one evening, sitting in the small chamber adjacent to the healer's wing. The room he had refused to trade for the master suite. I have worn enough chains for one lifetime. One night he found her watching him from the doorway. In the week since his liberation, his body had transformed. Regular meals, and her healing restoring the powerful frame starvation had stripped. He looked like the prince from the vision she had seen through the bond, but with something the young prince had lacked: depth. The kind only suffering and survival could carve. He crossed the room to her. What? Thinking about the first time I saw you. You could barely breathe. And you walked toward me anyway. He pressed his forehead against hers. His lips brushed hers. The lightest touch. They had not kissed before this moment. There had been no time, no safety, no space between crises. Sorrel closed the distance. The kiss was slow, deliberate. Two people learning what it meant to exist without burning. The bond is not complete, Calum said softly. It requires a mutual claiming, a mark given and received. He stepped back, giving her space. You do not have to. A forced bond is no different from a chain. Obligation? Sorrel stared at him. Calum, I crawled through sewage for you. I broke chains that had held for over a decade. I watched my grandmother die, giving me the power to free you. I stood in a throne room with a blade at my throat and told you to fight, because your life mattered more to me than my own. She stepped forward, closing the distance he had created. I did not do any of that out of obligation. I did it because from the moment I touched you in that dungeon, something in me recognized something in you. Not the bond, not the mark. You. She placed her hand over his heart. I fell in love with a wolf who could not speak. I fell in love with the way your ears moved when I talked, the way your breathing changed when I was near, the way you pressed your muzzle into my palm as if my touch was the only good thing left in the world. Her voice cracked, but she held his gaze. I loved you before I knew you were a prince. I loved you before I knew you were human. And I will love you long after every scar on your body has faded, because what I feel for you has nothing to do with crowns or bonds or ancient marks. Tears tracked silently down his face. No one has ever... His voice broke. He tried again. In all those years, no one ever... He could not finish. But she felt the words through the bond. I know, she whispered. You do not have to say it. I can feel it. She pressed her lips to the junction of his neck and shoulder. May I? Calum tilted his head, baring his throat in absolute trust. Please, he whispered. Sorrel bit down, the bond completed like a circuit closing. Silver gold light poured from the point where her teeth met his flesh, spreading outward in a wave that rippled through the walls of Kael Morthen and beyond, through courtyards and gates and forests and villages. Every wolf in the kingdom felt it. A bond so profound it resonated through the pack structure like a tuning fork. The instability that had plagued the territory, the tremors of a pack without a stable alpha bond, smoothed and steadied. Wolves who had been restless settled. Wolves who had been anxious calmed. The kingdom exhaled. Through the bond, she saw herself through his eyes. Not the invisible apprentice she had always believed herself to be, but a woman of staggering courage and quiet ferocity. The girl who had walked toward a dying wolf when every sane person would have run. And he saw himself through hers. Not the beast, not the victim, but a man who had endured the unendurable with his capacity for gentleness intact. "My queen," he breathed. "My king," she answered. And across the castle howls began, spreading through the kingdom, a sound of recognition and celebration, and the fierce, untamable joy of a pack made whole. 1 year later, the dungeon beneath Kael Morthen was destroyed, not sealed, not repurposed. Destroyed. Every chain melted, every sigil ground from the stone, until nothing remained but clean bedrock. "Oh, no wolf will ever be chained beneath this castle again," Sorrel told the council. "If Kael Morthen cannot hold its wolves through loyalty and justice, it does not deserve to hold them at all." The council objected. There were traditions, precedents, and practical necessities. Caleb listened in silence. Then he looked at his mate and said 4 words. "The queen has spoken." The dungeon was gone by nightfall. Raven's trial was held on the first day of autumn. He did not deny his crimes. When asked for a defense, he spoke 1 sentence. "I did what was necessary." Caleb stared at him for a long time. "So did I. And what is necessary now is that you live with what you have done. Not in chains, not in a dungeon. In exile, in a place where the wolves you harmed will never have to see your face again. You will carry the memory of every wound you inflicted, every year you stole. That is your punishment, not death. Memory." Raven was escorted to the frozen northern wastes, stripped of his name and title. He did not look back. And on a mild spring morning, 1 year to the day after a healer's apprentice walked into a dungeon and touched a wolf that should have killed her, Sorrel gave birth to a daughter. The labor was fierce and long, 16 hours of work that tested every ounce of the strength she had built through a year of breaking chains and building a kingdom. Caleb stayed beside her through every moment, holding her hand with a grip that threatened to crack her knuckles, his face gray with a terror that had nothing to do with battle. "Breathe," Sorrel told him between contractions. "You survived years in a dungeon. You can survive this." "I would take the dungeon," he said faintly. The child came into the world howling, not crying but howling, a sound so unmistakably wolf that the midwife nearly dropped her. Dark hair like her father, steady hands like her mother, and on her tiny left wrist, barely visible against newborn skin, a silver crescent glowing with faint warm light. Caleb held his daughter with tears streaming down his face, hands that could crush steel trembling with impossible tenderness. He stared at the small, perfect creature in his arms as if he could not reconcile her existence with everything he had known. "She has your mark," he whispered. Sorrel smiled through her own tears. "She has your stubbornness." She refused to arrive until she was ready. Wolves across the territory felt the birth through the pack bond, a ripple of new life spreading outward like a stone dropped in still water. Howls of celebration rose from every quarter. Sorrel watched the man she loved cradle their daughter against his scarred chest in the simple room adjacent to the healer's wing. The room Caleb had refused to trade for the royal suite. "I keep thinking about that first night," she said softly. "The door that should have been locked. You think it was more than chance? I think the bond led me there, waiting for me to be close enough, brave enough, or foolish enough, to walk through a door I had no business opening." "Foolish enough," Caleb agreed, and the smile that crossed his face was the most beautiful thing Sorrel had ever seen. Not because it was perfect, because it was real, earned through years of darkness and 1 year of learning to live in the light. "I dreamed you," he said, echoing the first words he had ever spoken to her. "Every night. And now I wake to you every morning, and every morning I am astonished that reality exceeded the dream." Sorrel traced the claiming mark on his throat, the silver bite that matched the golden one on her wrist, the two marks that proclaimed their bond to every wolf who saw them. "No more chains," she whispered. "No more chains," he agreed. "Not for us, not for anyone, not ever again." He kissed her, a kiss that tasted of tears and laughter and the quiet, unshakable certainty of two people who had found each other against every conceivable odd. Their daughter stirred between them, tiny fingers wrapping around her father's thumb with a grip that belied her size. And outside the window, where the forest met the castle walls and the first green shoots of spring pushed through the last traces of winter, a single wolf howled. It was not a howl of grief, not rage, not the broken, anguished sound that had haunted the corridors of Kael Morthen for years. It was a howl of home. And across the kingdom, every wolf lifted its head and answered. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.